look closely at the gold medals around their necks, because not everyone is buying the story being told. Team USA walked away with the FIBA World Cup, and on the surface it looks like just another dominant run powered by veteran experience. But there's a growing wave of discussion that suggests the real story might be far more complicated than the scoreboard shows. And if you think this is just about an 84-70 win over Spain, you're missing the deeper layer people are debating right now. Welcome back to WNBA Pro. Because today, we're not just talking about basketball, we're talking about how narratives get built, how rotations get justified, and how certain moments in the box score are being dissected frame by frame like evidence in a case file. Mainstream coverage wants you to see a clean, comfortable championship run, a simple celebration, get a routine gold medal moment. But the louder conversation online is asking something else entirely. Was this just veteran leadership doing what it always does? Or was this a system trying to find balance under extreme pressure, scrutiny, and expectation? And once you start watching the game through that lens, every decision suddenly feels a lot more interesting. The coaching choices, the rotations, the timing of substitutions, the way certain lineups clicked instantly, while others looked out of rhythm, hesitant, or overly controlled. And yes, that includes the handling of Caitlin Clark, because whether people agree or not, she's become the focal point of every debate she enters. Every possession she's involved in gets magnified, analyzed, and reinterpreted in real time. At times, she was used in unconventional roles, stretched, shifted, or placed in situations that didn't always reflect what fans are used to seeing from her in other settings. Some analysts saw it as tactical experimentation. Others saw it as hesitation to fully lean into a different offensive identity on a massive stage. Either way, it became one of the most talked about subplots of the tournament, and that's where the conversation starts to split. On one side, you have the argument that Team USA leaned heavily on experience to survive high-pressure international possessions, slowing the game down, tightening rotations, and trusting established decision-makers to close. On the other side, critics argue that the offense at times lost rhythm, becoming more predictable, more stagnant, and more vulnerable to Spain's disciplined defensive structure when tempo dropped. As that tension showed up clearly when ball handling responsibilities shifted toward veteran guards like Chelsea Gray, who was trusted with significant minutes in control of the offense. But the results were mixed. Flashes of composure, but also costly turnovers and stretches where the offense struggled to generate clean advantages. And in high-level international basketball, those possessions matter more than anything. Because when the pace drops and the defense is set, every mistake gets magnified. Meanwhile, the more aggressive style of play from players like Kelsey Plum and Kalia Copper added energy and scoring bursts, but also came with the trade-off of isolation-heavy possessions that sometimes broke rhythm rather than building it. And so the big question becomes, was this a perfectly executed, veteran-led championship strategy, or a team constantly adjusting on the fly, trying to stabilize identity under pressure? And while that debate continues online, one thing became impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark's impact on the tournament conversation didn't fade, it intensified. Because despite every rotation discussion, every tactical adjustment, and every stylistic debate, she still emerged as one of the defining statistical forces of the entire competition. When FIBA released its awards, the message was clear. Caitlin Clark was named the FIBA World Cup MVP, and that's where the conversation exploded again. FIBA's evaluation isn't based on reputation, marketing, or internal league politics. It's based strictly on performance, efficiency, and measurable impact across the tournament, and when the numbers were fully compiled, her presence stood out across multiple categories: scoring, playmaking, efficiency, and overall on-court impact. She didn't just contribute, she consistently ranked among the top performers in nearly every major statistical category tracked. That's why the reaction online split so sharply. Some fans saw it as the natural outcome of elite-level production, and where ongoing negotiations around the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement reached a critical turning point. As the ripple effects of the tournament continued to spread across the basketball world, talks between leadership and stakeholders reportedly accelerated, signaling that major structural decisions are now approaching a final stage. And that's where everything connects, because this isn't just about one tournament, one team, or one player. It's about how the modern game is evolving, who controls the tempo, who defines the system, and what happens when performance, perception, and power all collide on the biggest stage in women's basketball.
Number 1 in assists, number 1 in true shooting percentage, number 1 in plus minus, number 1 in 2-point field goal.
You need to understand the scale of what just unfolded here. After a long, intense, and highly publicized labor standoff that had the potential to disrupt the most anticipated WNBA season in history, the league and the Players Association finally reached a verbal agreement just 51 days before the 30th season is set to begin. And the real question is, why now? Why did both sides suddenly move after weeks of hardline positioning, public tension, and what looked like an unbreakable deadlock? The answer, according to growing debate around the situation, comes down to leverage and timing. Because while negotiations dragged on behind closed doors, the broader basketball landscape was shifting in real time. The FIBA MVP announcement, the global attention surrounding Caitlin Clark, and the surge in international viewership all painted a very different financial picture than the one being discussed at the bargaining table. And once those numbers became impossible to ignore, the dynamic reportedly changed. The owners, backed by billion-dollar franchises, saw what the data was signaling. Record attention spikes tied to new audiences, massive broadcast interest, sold-out arenas, and a level of mainstream visibility that the league had never experienced at this scale. At the same time, traditional viewership patterns tied to established veteran-led narratives were being compared side by side, and the gap in global pull became part of the conversation. That's where leverage enters the picture. And reports suggest the owners effectively called the bluff on the players' union after threats of a lockout and demands for a significant revenue share increase. The union pushed for a system that treated players more like true business partners in the league's financial growth. But from the owner's perspective, the financial engine powering that growth was already clear and already active. They believed the league's new era of revenue wasn't being driven evenly across the board, but instead concentrated around a single major catalyst that expanded the audience, boosted ratings, and unlocked new media deals. In other words, the league's financial surge wasn't seen as evenly distributed. It was seen as structurally dependent on one dominant draw, reshaping global interest in women's basketball, and that's where the tension really sits. And because while negotiations were happening, players continued to stand firm on their value and push for long-term financial security, and ultimately, they succeeded in securing a deal that significantly improves compensation and working conditions across the league. Early reports suggest major changes ahead, including a salary cap increase that could push average player compensation beyond $500,000, along with stronger protections and improved professional standards that reshape day-to-day conditions for athletes. On paper, it's a massive win for the Players Association, but underneath the celebration, there's an uncomfortable contradiction that many observers can't ignore. There's the same league veterans who previously pushed back against rising media narratives and questioned the attention certain players received, were now part of a system where that exact surge in visibility became the financial backbone of the entire negotiation. And then came the moment that quietly revealed the deeper truth behind the entire process. One line from the final press conference cut through all the corporate language and optimism, hinting that this deal wasn't just about fairness or growth, but about recognizing where the league's real economic momentum had shifted. Because in the end, this wasn't just a labor agreement, it was a reset of power, perception, and the economics of women's basketball all at once.
Keep those people on turret away from me. After a prolonged labor battle, the WNBA and WNBA Players Association reached a verbal agreement on the terms of a new collective bargaining agreement early Wednesday, just 51 days before the league's 30th season is set to tip off. Quote, the progress made in these discussions marks a transformative step forward for...
And listen closely to what veteran forward Alicia Clark is really saying here, because buried inside her words is a truth most people are overlooking. Players like me are going to be the ones that feel it the most, the veterans who are closer to the end of their careers. That statement isn't just reflection, it's context, because it helps explain why these negotiations stretched all the way to the final possible moment. The older, established players understood exactly what time it was. This wasn't just another labor cycle for them. This was likely the last major opportunity to secure a significant financial jump before retirement, and that urgency shaped everything from this perspective. And the pressure wasn't just about fairness or long-term structure. It was about timing the peak of a historic revenue surge and making sure they got their share while it was still peaking. Meanwhile, younger players were pushing in a slightly different direction. Get the deal done, stabilize the system, and take advantage of the unprecedented growth happening on the court and across the league. 2 timelines, 2 priorities, 1 negotiation, and that's where things became tense. Veteran players pushed hard for immediate, aggressive revenue-sharing adjustments, fully aware that this window of opportunity might never come again in their careers. Younger voices, on the other hand, were more focused on unlocking stability and long-term growth. In the end, all the veterans secured a massive financial outcome, but only because the entire league's revenue landscape had expanded to a level fueled by the very surge in popularity they had previously questioned or pushed back against. It's a brutal irony baked into the business side of the sport. But even with a verbal agreement now in place, the situation is far from settled, because a verbal deal is just the beginning, not the finish line. The actual collective bargaining agreement still has to be written, reviewed, voted on, and formally ratified by both the Players Association and the league's Board of Governors. And while lawyers work through every clause, definition, and legal detail, the WNBA calendar is already stacking into chaos. Expansion drafts for Portland and Toronto are approaching fast. The college draft is locked in. And then comes the real pressure point: free agency. More than 100 players are expected to hit the market, creating one of the most unpredictable roster-building windows the league has ever seen. Because with the previous CBA expired, teams have been operating in a holding pattern for months. Front offices know who they want, but haven't been able to fully act on it. Not yet. Once this agreement is officially finalized, that restraint disappears overnight. And what follows will likely be the most aggressive, fast-moving free agency period in WNBA history. Teams will suddenly have access to new financial flexibility. Players will be in position to negotiate significantly larger contracts, some projected in the $500,000 range, and front offices will be forced into rapid-fire decisions that reshape entire rosters in a matter of days. And what was stable one week could look completely unrecognizable the next. And in the middle of all that noise, one storyline continues to stand out as a constant signal through the chaos. Caitlin Clark's rise, her impact on viewership, and her presence on the international stage are now being viewed as a defining factor in how teams plan for the future. For the Indiana Fever, in particular, it reads less like a storyline and more like a warning about how quickly the entire competitive landscape is shifting around them.
This is Alicia Clark. What we just accomplished is going to change the lives of so many players, Clark said. We got you the best houses that they're going to pay for. And speaking from experience, players like me are going to be the ones that I think feel it the most. Yeah, the players on their way out? Yeah, that's why it's taking so long. That's why it's been taking so long. Get very dark for the rest of the league. Could get very dark for the rest of the league. Amber Cox and Kelly Crosswell have got to put an actual team around her, a team that will play to her play style. Got to do that. Can't bring in some old veterans who think that they're going to go for the MVP this year. We got to bring in some role players that know their role. Shout out to The Rock. Know your role.
Listen carefully. Because what's being laid out here is the real pressure point of the entire league right now. Amber Cox and Kelly Krauskopf, the key decision makers steering the Indiana Fever, are sitting on one of the most important roster-building opportunities in modern WNBA history. In front of them is a franchise-altering asset, an offensive engine unlike anything the sport has ever seen, and the decisions they make next will shape the league's direction for years. There is no margin for error anymore. They cannot afford to bring in players who need heavy isolation touches just to feel engaged. They cannot afford veterans who demand the ball for long, stagnant possessions or slow the tempo with outdated offensive habits. Every fit has to be intentional. Every piece has to scale. Why? Because building a true contender around Caitlin Clark is not about reputation, it's about compatibility. And the blueprint is brutally simple. You surround her with specialists, bigs who sprint the floor, set hard screens, and finish lobs in transition without hesitation. Wings who defend multiple positions, space the floor, and knock down open shots the moment defenses collapse toward the ball. Players who don't need complexity to be effective, just timing, spacing, and discipline. Not stars demanding hierarchy, but role players who understand structure. Because if Indiana makes the mistake of prioritizing name value over system fit, they risk disrupting the very rhythm that makes this offense unique. And in a system this fast and this precise, disruption is the one thing you cannot afford. And the film is already there for anyone willing to study it. When Clark is surrounded by movement shooters, rim runners, and players committed to constant motion, the entire floor opens up into something that looks less like traditional basketball and more like a calculated, unsolvable equation. That is the ceiling they are chasing. And while all of this is unfolding, the league itself has already come through its most uncertain moment. After months of tension and labor uncertainty, a transformative agreement has stabilized the structure of the WNBA moving forward. Veteran players secured historic financial gains. Ownership groups secured the framework needed to support massive media and business expansion. And at the center of it all, the league's visibility reached a level it has never experienced before. Caitlin Clark, meanwhile, has returned from the international stage with even more validation behind her game, adding another layer to an already escalating narrative about her impact on and off the court. Now everything converges at once. The Indiana Fever are officially on the clock, and every decision they make will be measured under the brightest spotlight the league has ever produced. The 2026 season is shaping up to be the most analyzed, most discussed, and most strategically dissected year in WNBA history. And this channel is going to track every step of it. No filtered narratives, no surface level talking points, just the raw reality of how the game is built, how money moves through it, and how basketball decisions actually get made behind the scenes. If you're following this closely, you already know what time it is. The league is shifting fast, and the gap between those who understand it and those who don't is only getting wider.